Thank you for joining the Pasco School Board of Directors this afternoon for a study session on levy planning. At the end of it, we'll have a little debrief on the bond and how that ties into the deadlines we have and the levy. We have Mr. Howard Roberts here this afternoon to lead us in this discussion. And as always, our board meetings and study sessions are broadcast on YouTube if you look up Pasco Schools, or on Charter TV channel 191. You can see that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Howard Roberts.
Good afternoon, although it looks like evening already out there. For today's session, I'd like to accomplish these items. Finish, first of all, the overview that I started last time in the state new funding formula, new funding mechanism, and House Bill 2242. And this part, the last part, has to do with accountability and transparency of those dollars. I'd like to review the estimated impact of the new funding to the district and to look at the changes in the way those levy dollars can be used, just kind of to highlight that. And then finally, behind this, I'll present a staff recommendation on a levy term, the length of the levy as far as the amounts to put before the voters the proposed February 2018 election. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Again, this is kind of the calendar that we talked about last time. And I just highlighted tonight in a couple areas because, as a reminder, if you feel comfortable with this discussion, you're ready to move forward, we do have adoption of the election resolution on part of the regular meeting agenda tonight. And as a reminder, this is all due by December 15th. We need to have the resolution actually over to the county. So again, a review from last time, the three main purposes of 2242, which involves major changes to state funding of school districts. The first is the increase in state funding of salaries. That's a big ticket amount. The second is the changes then of the mix between state and local funding. More of the funding burden does go to the state, but in return for that, there is a reduction in the amount of local dollars and then some restrictions on how those can be used. And then finally, the part I was going to talk about, this is a big investment for the state, and they have some ideas on how they want to make sure that this is working. So there's some fundamental changes in the way we're doing accounting that are coming up. So it's a big deal to me, so bear with me if it's a little boring, but it does affect us over in the finance area in particular. So Dr. Richardson noted last time what has been a continual frustration, not only for him, but for finance directors and superintendents and a lot of people around education, is it's very difficult to be able to say, what does the levy pay for? Right now, levies pay for basically everything that isn't covered by other sources of funding, and so it's kind of gap funding. So we can give you close approximations, but it's tough to say right down to the dollar exactly how those levy dollars are being used. So the new accounting regulations are designed to help answer that question. 2242 requires that levy dollars be separated from the rest of general fund into a separate accounting entity known as a subfund, which was new to me. We didn't learn about those in accounting when I went through, but it works. It's the idea, again, of creating some walls around the levy dollars and the local effort assistance dollars so that only expenditures that are eligible can come out of that area. And the state auditor's office is charged with making sure that that happens, or that that wall is maintained. So all this, to build this wall and put this other level of complexity on accounting, is going to cost us some in terms of a software rewrite. We're not the only ones, all the other districts are too, so we can share the costs. And there probably will be some additional labor. How much, I can't say. Some initial estimates I saw at the state level seemed really high to me. But as we get into it and we start figuring out, well, this person or this position is paid X amount from the levy and X amount from this police, and X, you can see where it can get to be a little bit complex. So at any rate, there's going to be some additional resources that are going to be that are going to have to be used to implement these new accounting regulations. But the end result is probably worth it, because we should be able to say, here's what the levy dollars are spent for. Another impact a little bit earlier, actually starting with next year's budget. It's not just a single year budget, we have to do a 4-year forecast. And that does have to include enrollment projections. And then within the budget, there's some detailed personnel analysis done by full-time equivalents by what type they are, as you can see there, and then what, again, is a source of funding, whether it's state or local. So those are some of the things that we really will see, and that pretty much wraps it up for the accountability and transparency, but I hope you can kind of see how the state is trying to track those dollars and make sure they're used as intended with this new law. Now I wanted to just revisit, a couple of the slides that I showed last time. This has to do with the overall revenue impact to the district. We talked last time about the swap between state and local funding. On the one hand, the state is increasing that funding per unit for teaching, administrative, and classified staff. And there is also a lot of increased dollars for career and technical education, learning assistance, bilingual, highly capable, and professional development. And some of that we've already seen this year. On the other hand, in exchange for this additional state funding, the state is requiring districts to put a cap on their property tax collections, and the cap is actually on the rate, so it's capped at $1.50 per thousand of assessed value. And this will mean a reduction in Pasco, like most districts in property tax collections, levy collections. And then, of course, even with this smaller levy, there's some restrictions on how it can be used. It's no longer maintenance and operations levy. They're now enrichment levies, and the use is restricted to supplementation beyond the state. In other words, what the state provides in staffing ratios, if it's something that is outside of the state basic education, like extracurricular, those type of things. All told, and I will still maintain this, that the amount of new state revenue in Pasco's case should more than offset the decrease in levy and local effort assistance. Even with the reduction in the levy, though, I want to point out that levy is still key to maintaining our whole picture as far as funding goes. It's all part of things regardless of where it comes from. I showed this table and graph last time to kind of depict the estimated increase or decrease in some key categories of revenue, and this isn't all revenue in the general fund, it's most of it though. The numbers represent the change in revenue type each school year brought about by the passage of 2242 over the status quo. I gave some more thought to this because I know this has created some confusion, and it's out in the public and newspapers and everything else. And I wanted to take a look at it and maybe give you a better idea what it means. It's correct, but I think it could be a little bit misleading. First of all, there's revenue in this thing. In the second row, categorical and programs, that is not general revenue. That is very specific as far as what we can use. It's for special student population, et cetera. It is not considered general revenue like in the old sense that levies were. Can't be used for general. So that's quite a bit of money. And then second, in the first column, you see 2017-18. In my view, we already have those dollars. This might have been good for legislative purposes to talk about over 4 years, this is what we're going to get. But for our purposes and looking forward to what a levy might need to be, I'd like to start with 18-19. We already have budgeted 17 and 18, those dollars. So as far as decisions made in the future, I would like to eliminate that column. And besides, in that first column in 2017, I think you remember that compensated related number there, that's just a cost of living increase, and the legislature put that in there, but their increased funding for teacher salaries doesn't even happen until it begins in 2018-19. So all that to say, I took a shot at this, and it looks a lot different, but trying to get at what really is available for general purposes. And you can see there's some real changes there. We're going to start with 18-19, and you can see that there's a very small net increase in 18-19. That's the first half of the additional state funding for compensation, but it's offset by the reduction in part of the levy year. Again, these don't cut nice and evenly. The next year, you see the full amount in 1920, the full amount of compensation funding when that all kicks in the red area. And then in the final year, you can see as things kind of stabilize. So by the end of 3 years, we're looking at a net increase of 4.9 million in general purpose revenue is what I would say. And I think that's a much better indication of the true general dollars that we have available compared to where we are today. Any questions on that piece?
So this is assuming that the $1.50 levy
Yes.
would be passed? Okay.
Yes, that's still in there, right.
So is this based on, so this is increased revenue. We don't see the expenses here.
Right, absolutely not.
So that's, this is revenue increase, assuming our expenses all stay the same year to year.
Yes, this is only one side of the ledger here. This is only the revenue side.
What changed on the compensation-related row by 10, 15%?
I took out the dollars that were there for the COLA in 17-18.
So we actually would get more, but that's in today's dollars then?
Right, I mean, I
So
assume
we'll
we
get
already-
24 million, but it's 21 million in today's dollars.
I just kind of assumed that that's what, we've already got that, the funds for the COLA, so I didn't want to count those again as we're looking forward. Okay, so,
One more question on
Oh, I'm
just
sorry.
summarizing those two slides. So we'll have about, according to this, $5 million-ish that goes towards increases in wages, and then the other increase in programs of 15, 16 million a year is
right,
intended to create programs in whatever goes under categorical to enrich us beyond where we are today.
yeah, actually it turns into they're funding more hours in a week is how they do that. And they're increasing the hours so we can do more support in those particular areas. That's, I think, the way they're doing both the LAP and the bilingual piece.
But this is money, so going back to this previous slide,
Yeah.
so this is just the revenue side. The net increase in revenue,
Yeah.
if we have a $1.50 levy over what we got last year, or 17-18, is only 327,000.
Right, in that first year, because, yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So now you look at compensation related, 9 million. There was some program, I think, in the previous slide.
Right.
But presumably, we are paying for that currently with local dollars.
For program,
Can you go to the previous slide?
I'm not the expert on program, but I don't think.
Well,
we are.
so categorical and programs.
Yeah.
So we're getting additional money on the revenue side for that. We're anticipating that in 18-19. But our net is only going up. So this one says 13.
Right. I don't want to get you too confused, but these are two different charts in the sense
Yeah.
that I pulled the categorical out completely in the second chart. It's not even a factor.
Right, I see that.
And the,
I'm trying to figure out, so we're getting additional revenue here, at least this is.
yes,
If you just break it out from the state, we're getting 12 million for, in 18-19, 12 million for compensation, and then we're getting an additional 10 for programs and whatever else. But where is that going, I guess would be the question. If you go back to the next slide.
oh, shoot.
So the net change in revenue basically is 327,000.
And I'm calling it general because it excludes the program side.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not counting 17, 18, we've already got those dollars, so
Right.
I really trimmed it down. And I wish I would have thought of this earlier, because I think this gives you a lot better picture
Well,
of
as
where
long
things are.
as it's accurate. I mean, as long as that is our revenue, total revenue.
Yeah, it's as accurate as an estimate from OSP I can be, so, yeah. And it's the best that I've seen out there, so.
But so next year, we would anticipate our revenue to increase over this year's revenue, 327,000. And
Yes,
then going forward from 1920, from 1819, we would expect an additional
correct.
4.3 million. And then
Finally, it kind of levels off and we stay at about that 4.5, and I think that should be ongoing if nothing changed.
increasing each year $4.5 million.
Well, over today's life, where we are right now.
Not each year, that's the
Right.
total over today.
Right.
So you're only increasing less than
Right, so-
600,000 in
Right.
2021.
Right.
Okay, so that's not each year, that's today's dollars.
Correct. There is some inflation in the model, I know too, but yeah.
So there's just one big jump really in 1920.
Right. That's when the full 100% of that new salary compensation comes in.
I mean,
So are we thinking about running a 4-year levy? Or are we thinking about running a 3-year,
I'll
a 2-year levy?
get to that.
We're
but
getting
yeah.
to that.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I've been through this and I can't even remember. So, I know that the district has run on a tighter budget because of lots of things. We put a lot of money out for curriculum and teacher salaries and other things that are really important. And, but I want to make sure we're not asking for more money than we need from the voters. So I realize this is with a 1.5. I realize next year we're going to need that money because, you know, we're basically the same. So, yeah, I just want to know then what that money is
Yeah.
going to be used for, and
I'll get to that too a little bit. I mean, at least some ideas of what it should be used for. And I guess I would say that I don't think anybody here is intending to take more from the voters. I don't think that's, any of our goals here. So I'm just going to try to show you what I see as the revenue and how a levy still fits into the picture. Even though it could be smaller, it still fits into the overall piece.
Can I ask one more question before we move on? So I think I understand the $4 to $5 million on this page for compensation related. But again, going back to the programmatic and categorical, if we get an influx of $15, $16 million in 1 year, what are we going to provide to the students and to the taxpayers with that 15, 16 million? Is it 100 more teachers?
So
Or
Mr.
is it? what is
Mr.
it?
Bowles is coming up toward the microphone, Howard, to help you with the program question.
Just one thing about that, we won't get 15. Remember, this chart is kind of different. It relates to what things were before 2242 and after. So it starts at $5.3 million. We've got that
Right.
already.
In 2019-20, we have 15, 16 million more than we do today.
Right, but that's just,
So we're going to ramp up at 5 million per year the next 3 years. What are we going to do each year with that extra 5 million is the question.
okay, yeah.
So I can speak to what we're going to see in at least 3 programs. And so one, we saw a big influx this year in high poverty LAP. We'll be receiving more revenue in high poverty LAP in the next year, it appears. That revenue is designated for our schools that have more than 50% free and reduced eligibility, can be used for at the high school level for freshmen in some cases. The regulations are silent around sophomores and can be used for credit retrieval for juniors and seniors. In terms of what's acceptable, providing more certificated or classified instructional staff for students who would be targeted as needing some extra help in order to achieve at higher levels would be appropriate. It can also be used for behavior intervention in that regard. We should also see a small influx in state transitional bilingual, and that revenue would be for certificated and classified support primarily for our students who are eligible for those programs. We see an uptick in special ed from the funding formula that was 12.7% to 13.5%. And what that will do for us is special ed's a program that at this point is partially funded out of the levy. So any increase that we would receive there in terms of allocation based on whether our special ed eligibility percentage would actually tick up a bit would really in effect maybe provide a little bit of relief to the general fund. So those are the big three changes that I see on the horizon. I'm certainly happy to take more questions in that regard.
So it's more staff, it sounds like. Where do we put these staff if we're saying we're already crowded? How do we handle 50 to 60 to 70 to 80 new staff members each year for the next 3 years?
And it wouldn't necessarily in any of those cases have to be exclusively for staff. We could use the revenue in each case, although restricted to certain categories of students to purchase intervention materials, intervention curriculum, to some extent instructional technology, and what we can do there differs across each of those funding sources. So we would have some flexibility in terms of how we would do that. We also work very closely with our buildings, and each building projects different needs, and they make really good cases for how they would utilize that revenue in terms of programmer personnel, and to the extent can be supported on the behavioral side. So we do have some flexibility in terms of how we would expend that revenue. It wouldn't have to be exclusive to staff. We're pretty locked down, particularly in high poverty LAP, around the revenue absolutely has to go to the building where it is, where it's designated. We have some flexibility in the other two regards.
So I know one example you mentioned, behavior, and when I visited elementary schools this fall in the last month or two, one way that some have already used that is by essentially hiring a behavior intervention specialist. You could think of it just as another counselor, which I think has been needed for years, because we are at our elementary schools, the majority of them have 700 to 900 students, and that's impossible for one counselor to provide the service that those kids need. They're just essentially putting out fires on a day-to-day basis and not preventing anything by teaching the curriculum that's provided for counselors. So some of our schools have added behavior intervention specialists, they call them, and to help with that area. And I would like to see a lot of that go to the elementary schools that qualify for those types of services that traditionally now we've underfunded, since our elementary schools are much bigger than a typical school. So that's one example that I saw that was beneficial, that the feel of those schools was that they were providing a much better opportunity for the teachers and the students to have an intervention that's actually going to affect their day-to-day experience and provide a better environment for the students to learn.
And we had 4 elementaries that were not impacted by the increased revenue, and Alma Duran did a really nice job of finding a little bit of revenue at the last minute, so we were able to provide those services in some of the other buildings as well. In my opinion, the way the state funds, particularly high poverty LAP, is a little bit glitchy in that you can be at 49% and you're not eligible at all. If you were to move from 50 to 49% the next year, you lose the resource. So we're trying to do all we can with other categorical funding sources to make sure that we've got some stability in terms of looking at programming year to year and not having to always adjust to the whim of how the states determined they would allocate that resource.
It's not something we can address legislatively, because that's the type of thing that drives me crazy, right? Because I mean that would encourage movement of students to keep a school at greater than 50%. I mean that type of model in my mind does not work and is unethical, because it encourages districts to maintain a certain number of high poverty students in a building so that they get additional funding, and that to me is unethical because it will encourage districts to move students to maintain that funding source at the detriment of the students, in my mind, in some cases, if you're going to move them to a new school just to maintain funding. And I'm not saying we've done that. I hope we never have. But that is the temptation that I'm sure districts have with that law. So I don't know what legislatively is talked about with that, but to me that is unethical to have that type of a model.
When we've been in real close communication with Marie Sullivan since we learned of the regulation, again, over the last couple weeks. There are a couple pieces that we've advocated for through Marie. One piece being, we'd really like to see the allocation per pupil. We have 4 elementaries between 40 and 50%, just under the threshold, which means we have about 1,300 students in Pasco who, in my opinion, deserve the same support as students in buildings that are comparable demographically. So per pupil allocation would fix that. The legislation also has some issues around limitations in 10th grade, and so we are in communication. It's not an OSPI issue, it's the way the legislation was codified at the 3rd extended session.
Well, I appreciate your efforts in trying to keep our education across the district equitable. So even if the state isn't funding those 4 schools that still have kids that have those high needs, it's very important, I feel like, to offer the same programs across the district where needed. Anyway, I mean, there's some situations that it's not needed, but in this situation it is, so I appreciate the equity.
Yeah, and again, I think Carla Lobos and Alma Duran did a really nice job making some last-minute adjustments because we were, our hands were relatively tied until we got the revenue from the legislature, and as you recall, that was really, really late in the summer.
So all of this categorical and programs money is new money. It's not backfilling some of what we're using for levy dollars now?
It has restrictions on its use and how they'll allocate it, but yes.
So what we're saying, if you go to the next slide, is levy dollars right now are just funding compensation?
Well, the dollars are to come in and it's for increased funding of compensation. That's what the dollars are for.
Okay. So this one here, so we'll have an additional 4 million next year and the year after, well, 2019, 20, 2021. If we keep that levy there.
At a dollar.
So-
That's the assumption in the model, right?
So what are the restrictions on that money?
On the levy.
Well, that additional 4 million, I mean, is it?
It's for basic general purposes. It is to be used, this legislative intent is to increase the state's funding of salaries in the district, okay? Because the recognition is that there's been a gap between what it actually costs
Right.
to have employees versus what the state's funding. And so these dollars are the result of tweaking of that formula, so there's more money to come in. I think I showed last time there's a new average salary that they're going to put us to and things.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, so it's basically salary. I mean, that $4 million is going to be, that's local money. The state is adding their money, the top row there.
They're
Right.
increasing their funding
They're increasing their
Of
funding. So
salaries.
we are,
of things that we're already funding.
Right.
That we're already paying for.
and then it's not shown in there. I mean, we've got a negative on our enhancement levy, but that's not a negative number. We're just decreasing
Right.
the number by that.
Exactly, it's a change, so,
Yeah.
from where we are, so.
So if this money is coming in to pay for the compensation that we're already paying for out of our general funds and our levy funds, and anyway, so this money is in general education, we will be able to use, it will free up money elsewhere for curriculum, for
Can
technology.
be part of the prioritization of,
What about land acquisition? Can we put it or is it not, can it not be used for that?
no, it could be used for land acquisition.
Okay.
It's general fund money.
It's general fund money, so if we transferred it in, then we could into the,
You have to be careful too, how far we go with capital, but I checked for sure, and land can be, it's one of them. Yeah.
and land acquisition's one, but building schools isn't, or, got it.
So Now, when you say building schools, what about furniture, technology?
I think equipment, as long as it isn't a wall, I think you could probably do it. I mean, that's, you know, I think when you start knocking out walls and putting things, then you start to get into what could be a little dicey with the state. And I would check with Jim McNeil before, if anything got close, so, yeah.
So security upgrades, safety enhancements, maintenance, new roofs,
Yeah,
new HVAC
I would want to
systems.
check those. It's just because I'm cautious,
Yeah.
right off the front, I would say probably, but I would want to double check on that. Because again, a new roof is, yeah,
Part of a building.
part of the building, so, yeah.
So the compensation related and categorical and programs, we get that no matter what. Everybody gets that because of HB 2242,
Yeah.
even if you don't pass your levy.
Right, right. It's part of the new formula that drives the apportionment that I'll talk about later, but yeah. Yeah.
So could, you know, Dr. Richardson talked about, you know, this counselor thing. That's another thing that this could be used for if we need.
Yeah, and there's a whole list of priorities I'm thinking that
Okay.
we could come up with, yeah,
With a whole list of priorities.
yeah.
So the other piece, Howard, correct me if I'm wrong, is, so for example, this year we had to absorb, I don't know, a 10% increase in retirement, a 21% increase in, you know, health insurance. Don't quote me on those percentages, but every year we as a district absorb those percentages of increases to retirement, healthcare benefits, et cetera. So, you know, while that's $4 million in 1920, it's not taking into consideration that the current things that we're currently paying for inflate over time. Retirement does, insurance does, et cetera.
Right.
Is that accurate?
That's correct, particularly for those individuals, and we'll talk about that later, but that aren't covered by state funding at all. I mean, the state, for their funding units, they give you a certain allowance for benefits and whatnot, but if you're outside of that, if you're one of the nurses or whoever that isn't covered, guess who gets to pay the full brunt of any type of increases in benefits or whatever? This is, the superintendent said, it will be hitting those general dollars, and we
Right.
do pick those up now.
It also would be, for example, as we continue to grow, increase transportation costs, increase maintenance, custodial, if we were to have new facilities, increase in those operational costs.
Right. Additional routes for buses, anything like that. So again, I kind of say priorities because there's always something out there. If I can, any other questions? I'll move on.
So I guess just to, I don't mean to perseverate, but, you know, while potentially $4 million may seem like a lot, you know, when you start looking at a growing district, inflating costs, et cetera, you know, $4 million could be absorbed, a portion of it could be absorbed in those inflating operational costs over time. So it's not like just $4 million that isn't, could potentially be restricted. You know, it could be designated for those existing operational costs as they inflate over time.
Yeah, but I think this is where we have to, if our costs are going to inflate, then our revenue needs to inflate. I mean, we shouldn't be picking that up with our local dollars because they will just continue to grow. And again, I know that's something that we don't have a lot of control over, but we need to let those who do know that as our costs escalate, especially if things like, so the retirement increased, what was that legislation? What drove that?
Yes, that was legislation.
Okay, so they gave us an additional cost. Did they give us any revenue?
They
to
did
compensate?
for the state-covered units again, you know, and I'll talk about that here, but
Okay.
not all units are, so, yeah.
I mean, there's always something that we can spend money on, so.
That's a perfect example of another way we can use our legislative advocacy, right? Because giving us unfunded mandates saying, okay, well, you have to do this, but we're not going to send you the revenue for it, so you better just pick it up as a community or just, you know, you're going to have to find the way. See, that's not right. So I'd like to see our legislative advocacy that we're paying to do that.
But not just us, every school district in the state.
So now I want to just take a break here to tell you about some really good news. I think some of you may know this, but if you look at this chart, and I did revise it since it's a second revision from the one you had before, and take a look at that last column, and I've scored out the numbers that were formerly last time I showed you and put some new numbers in there, and they're significantly lower. And you know, why is that so? Well, I got the estimate of assessed value from Steve Marks for next year. The original assumption was at 6% growth. It's almost double that. It's 11.86 in assessed value. And I asked him, okay, so what do you see behind this? And just so you know, he said it's across all the sectors. He said new construction is bigger than it has been in 8 years as far as dollar amounts. And I don't need to tell you that you can see that. But the other pieces are just the existing commercial and residential. He said 10 to 12% appreciation in value. The market is hot here, and he said, but right now I don't see that discontinuing in the near future. I wouldn't want to bet a lot of dollars on that, but at least for this next year, you can see that's going to have quite an impact on the assessed value. And you can see what it does. Not only does it increase things, but it actually helps smooth out that bubble between 17 and 18 that we were talking about that would happen when the state put the 89 cents on. Because between the two, local levy and existing bonds, we've lost about 56 cents, decreased about 56 cents there. So the net impact, even with the state's new thing, is only about 33 cents more next year. So that's big. That's a lot better. It's a little bit of a way to smooth. When we look at the next line coming down, of course, it drops off still substantially because of $1.50. But, you know, it naturally kind of smooth things here. So it was timely. It helped out in that respect. So again, from a taxpayer standpoint, you're looking right now, and of course this is all estimated, and I don't know assessed value for sure what's going to happen, but from about 861 down to 649, it's a pretty significant drop.
So an interesting thing on this slide. So our levy rate is a fixed rate, or a fixed dollar amount.
Correct.
So as our property values go up, our levy rate goes down.
Exactly.
However, if you look at the state, as property values go up, theirs is not a fixed dollar amount, theirs is a rate.
Yeah.
So their revenue goes up, so they better be sharing some of this, is my point.
I'm with you.
You know, I just did a little bit of math, and it looks like even if we reduced that by that $4 million, it would only equate to 2 to 3 cents different
That's
in the
about
tax. Is that what you got
Yeah,
to?
that's about right. That sounds about right to me.
Because of the state match, and so that's a tiny amount
It's a fraction.
per person for something that might be very helpful, especially in, you know, anyway, there are lots of things that are coming up, and trying to get our ninth graders on track for graduation and things like that. There's a lot of things, and so, yeah, 2 to 3 cents is pretty minimal.
Yeah. Then I redid the next slide just to remind you that, you know, looking at 2019 at $1.50, I kind of ran some numbers again, and you can see what happens here. And it doesn't look a lot different. The total is still 26 million. And why would that be? It's because the way levy equalization works, or local assistance. If the levy amount goes up like it did, that means you'll probably get less levy equalization. It's designed to kind of help equalize those things. And so the total size of the box is still around $26 million. Again, reminders, if a levy is not passed, or it's not, you know, there's no levy equalization money, we all know that. And if you pass a levy and it works out to be less than $1.50, the levy equalization will be reduced by a prorated amount. That's about $175,000 per penny. So if you did $1.49, you'd get about that much less. And that changes, of course, as years go out. So the next one is new. So what does the district currently pay with levy dollars? We've heard the question. I'm going to give you a shot here. This, to me, is the easiest way to take a look at it. So let's take a look. This is a clip of our latest apportionment from the state of Washington. And what you've got here are different funding categories. It's not exhaustive. I don't have every one on there. And then next to them, you see the number of FTEs that the state will fund. For example, principals, 52 and a bunch of change. We actually, just for example, we have 53 principals, so we're right there. I mean, almost exactly the same. If you go down a little further, classroom teachers, we're funded at 868. Some of those include that K-3 reduction, but right now the number of teachers is a little over 1,000. And so how do we pay for those? Well, when we look at a levy, a couple of things we look at are things like the visual and performing arts that are currently covered. We've got 65 FTE there, for example. And the facilities and coaches and others along those lines, we've got 53 of those. So you can see really quickly where there's some other folks that would fit in that category that are not funded. They're the ones that I'm talking about that are not funded by dollars that traditionally the levy has been used to pick up and to make sure we provide those same level of services. If you go down to nurses, as I said before, it's kind of sad. Well, yeah, actually, things like psychologists, 0.494 for the whole district. I don't know how you would ever do that, but in nurses, 2.94 for our district, and that's not what we've come to do in Pasco. And so we actually have almost 16 nurses. And again, that difference has to come from somewhere because the state won't pay for it. So this is traditionally a big part of what we've used levy for. And that's why this is a repeat of the slide I showed last time, but I wanted to put some dollars behind that because I took the differences between what the state funds and how much we currently have. And I just took today's dollars and I did some averages for salaries and whatnot. And you can see currently, for the current level of service we provide, there's $26.1 million. That's real close to that levy that I was talking about in, again, positions that aren't funded by the state that we feel are important here in Pasco as far as our level of service.
Could these be paid for with the new levy dollars?
Yes, yes. Thank you that was a good prompt, because when the state, 2242 is not abundantly clear, as I said last time, but one of the things it does say, enhancement items do include staffing over the prototypical model. So these are staffing over the prototype. For me, it's a real easy, we don't have to worry about that. These are a slam dunk as far as I'm concerned, as far as going through. Good, thank you for that question.
And it can be used for social workers, you said, programmatic dollars?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are just BEA dollars. You know, I excluded anybody who's funded by special programs from this analysis, so. Now here's the flip side of thing, and I didn't show you this before, but here's other items that the district has historically asked for as part of levy funding that are not likely to be considered enrichment. So we'd have to come up with another way to fund these. And I put one basically on here because it's big. Startup costs for new schools. And if you recall, the whole state funding is driven by number of students. It's not number of buildings. So you add up put a new building in, you're basically just rearranging the students. You're not creating any more funding. So that's been an issue, and we've done this in the past. Actually, I was looking in the last levy, we talked about this a little bit. It wasn't near this much. But if we take a look at the costs for these types of items, and there may be others, and kind of, put some inflation on it, we're looking at about $1.3 million per elementary, and about a little more than double that for a new middle school. So you put those numbers together, you get about $5.3 million on the current bond that we're waiting to see what's going to happen with. I mean, there's some priority costs that are coming down the road that
Is
I want to give you
this
an
the
example.
year before it opens? So before we've hired a principal to be the startup the year before, or is this the first year
It's the
that
first
it's
year,
open?
because usually you can charge the principal to the capital projects as part of the bond, the first year, when they're the planning principal and all. But after that, it's all general fund. And so you're right, this is when the kids start coming that year, and we try to get it stocked up and ready to go.
So why is the principal, assistant principal not counted, but teachers are in the state funding model?
Well, okay.
Or is this two different things? Like the
No.
principal is
No,
before it
you're,
opens? I'm confused.
I didn't put teaching in here for startup costs because theoretically, and I know this doesn't always work out, but theoretically, you can move teachers a little bit, right? If you're creating new spaces for them. I could put teachers on there, it'd be a lot more, but I didn't do that.
So you're assuming we don't hire any more teachers?
Right.
But then that wouldn't reduce our class sizes, and so really
Correct.
teachers would be on here using that theory,
Yeah,
and it'd be even a lot higher.
it could be a lot higher, right?
Well, and in theory, that's what happens when you open a new school, but having gone through that process when we opened a couple new schools at the same time, it absolutely generated the need for additional FTE. So again, just for argument's sake, the teachers shuffle around and it's kind of a one-for-one, but it doesn't work out that way. It almost always, in my experience, opening a new school requires additional FTE.
Yeah. So as long as the district is kind of in building mode, whether or not this one we've got going goes or not, I think my point is I'd be kind of hesitant to give up too much in general revenue, whatever the source, just because we've got several priorities that have been identified, including how we staff and operate the new schools. So given all that, I'm going to get to the closer here. Recommendation, first of all, 4-year levy term. There's some advantages to that, keeping that rate unchanged, reducing the number of elections. It seems to outweigh the objections. There's some language in the resolution that actually protects the district if the law should change during the 4 years and things. Jim put some language in there, so I think we'll be okay there, and that was one of my concerns about it. Also, from what I understand, the 2 surrounding districts are also going 4-year. So with that, I would recommend that. I would also recommend that the 4-year levy be done at a $1.50 rate, resulting in the highlighted levy amount in the middle of the page for each year. What I wanted to do, though, too, here is to also give you a picture of what it looks like with the other counterpart to levy, the levy equalization amount. And if you look at the far right, there's your total levy and levy equalization all the way through. And again, if you notice, the numbers aren't changing that much over year, because as the levy amount goes up, again, the levy equalization will go down. And that's not all bad. I mean, in a way, just because I've been here long enough, I remember when the state was threatening to pull levy equalization. In a way, it gives us more control over our own destiny, the more levy that we can have in that funding mix. But by the time you get to 2022, levy amount actually exceeds the LEA. It kind of swaps around, which is where it is right now. A couple of assumptions here. One is that per the advice that I've got from everyone, I've gone really high on the estimate, because you pay a price if you don't go high on this one as far as assessed value. So I just took the 12% and said we're going to do that every year, and I hope we don't, but I just put it in there. If we don't hit that target, it won't hurt us, because, in the sense, as long as we don't budget for that number, if we budget for 3% or whatever, it still won't hurt us. But by putting that high of an assessed value and that high of a levy amount, it allows us to make sure we capture everything that is associated with the $1.50. $1.50 will still be the limit as to what the individual can pay. And I have enrollment pegged at 2% here. So again, the yellow highlighted items are the ones that would appear in the resolution. And as I mentioned before, there is an action item for that resolution later on. And I feel like I need to open it up and just ask if there are any questions, or if you feel prepared to kind of move forward on that tonight. So
Do you have that other slide we talked about?
I don't know where it is.
And he wasn't able to load it?
Sorry. Yeah, I could have it for the other part, maybe tonight.
Tonight? Okay. Do we know what Kennewick and Richland are doing? Are they running 2-year levies, 4-year levies?
My understanding was they were both running 4 years. Do you have anything, Michelle?
So my understanding is the same. Kennewick and Richland are both looking at a 4-year levy at $1.50, and just for also sharing, Kennewick and Richland are both looking at adding an additional levy in a technology levy. So asking for an additional piece that would be specific for technology. We are not recommending that, given the nature of our November election, and we just felt like that plus the levy would get us where we need to be in a way that was respectful of our taxpayers, both in impact and just ability to kind of make sense of all of the impacts to them.
Well, and not looking at the money aspect, I think the district's made great gains in technological advances without running a special levy the last couple of years. So.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I just have a couple comments. This is our study session where we discussed this, and I'm absolutely in favor of a 4-year levy. I think the main reason is just voter fatigue. It takes a lot to run a levy, and people in our community are sick of having things brought before them. So just to respect that, even if it affects, makes it so we get less money, I'm fine with that. I think the $1.50 is okay, or maybe $1.49. I know that's like an accountant mathematician nightmare, but just to show that we're, but I'm okay with $1.50 too. And I think the important thing is showing the need, and the things that I came up with real quick to kind of highlight from your presentation and just from my own thoughts is, number one, the state underfunds education. So in a community like ours, where we continue to grow rapidly and we're already years and years behind of buildings and support for our students, that's only going to get worse over time. And so to me, I know that the question I can tell we're all kind of uncertain of is, well, where exactly is the money going to go? And it's so hard because we don't even have all the details yet from the state. But to me, the underlying issue is the state does not fund us well. They don't fund education, and we just keep having all these students. It almost makes me want to cry. Like, we have to house them and teach them to the best of our ability, and we do not have the resources to do that. And so that's disheartening and discouraging, right? Because we have these massive housing developments. So for that reason, I'm absolutely in favor of it. I like how you pointed out, like, the nurse and the paraeducator. I'll just point out those two. Okay, 3 nurses for 18,000 students. Okay, our elementary schools, they have 900 students. You know how many kids have asthma, peanut allergies, diabetes at these schools? And do you want your child at a school where there's not someone there that can help them if something comes up? So this is a real issue, a real concern. So I can't even fathom how the state says, okay, well, you, with 18,000 students, qualify for 3 nurses. I mean, right? So, and again, that's only going to get worse as we add more students. The need will be greater because we'll continue to be underfunded for even more schools and students. And then I'll just mention the paraeducator. I think that's an area where we could better utilize if we had the funding, because I'd like to see more special ed inclusion. I had a talk with someone in our district where eventually one of our principals had this dream of, special ed will be more included in general education. And there's obviously a law, but there's kind of, and that I think is a change that's going to occur, and we're going to need the support to do that. If you have a child with autism that we want to have included in their general ed second grade classroom, that's not going to be feasible no matter how great the second grade teacher is if they don't have some support. So that, just those 2 examples alone, looking at all of our schools, we could use the assistance there. So I think it's very defensible, even though there are questions like what exactly, and what exactly can we use it for? Which brings me to my third point, which would be the state is requiring better accountability and transparency, which has been my fuss all along. Like, how do we tell people, well, this is what you paid and this is what it went to? We couldn't, because it was literally just lumped with other money, and that drives people crazy. You want to know that, okay, in my budget this month, I paid $120 in levy funding, and I helped fund the nurse at my child's school, and my child has diabetes, and so that's really important to me. But when you can't do that, that's frustrating. You just feel like you're just giving to this big gold pot of money. So I think, though, for those reasons, I'm in favor of this, and even though we still have some question marks, and I think there's still kind of an unease with all the questions in our state and in our community. I'm absolutely in favor of that, either $1.50 or $1.49. And then I'll just throw this out there, I'd like us to readdress impact fees. We had this discussion about 2 years ago, right when I was on the board, and I was very much in favor of looking at increased impact fees, and was received some really harsh response from some people in our community for that. But look at where we are now. The developments keep coming, and we have to house them somewhere, and we don't have anywhere to house them. And so that's discouraging, and I'd love it if the same people came back and we had that discussion again. So I'd like us to look at that.
Mr. Roberts, so we had a discussion earlier today, and I've had I've heard other board members say this, but last week, 3 weeks ago, when we had the first part of this discussion, we talked about the pros and cons of running this in February versus November. And then there's other options we heard, like April and August. And we know that we can only run this twice in one calendar year. And you and I had the discussion, and you were going to go look at pros and cons. I didn't get the email. I know you crafted it. So I know you looked at pros and cons. But looking at that, we just went to the voters and asked for money in November. Do we want to turn around and ask for it again in February? I mean, that's a pro there, waiting till April, a couple more months. Another thing we heard last year during the snow from the volunteers that worked on that levee was that they had snowmageddon, and it was hard to go out and knock on doors, and it's hard to run a campaign with snow. So is April better than February? So I'd be interested in your and the district's take on pros and cons in running a levy in February versus, say, April.
Yeah, you're testing my memory. I want to make sure I got him here, but I did talk with Mr. McNeil, Jim McNeil, about this too, and just said, overall, what do you see, and things like that. And he pointed out the same two pros that you have, and so I would just reiterate those, that those are two advantages. There are some concerns. One is just practically, April is when your first half of your property taxes due. I don't know if that's a good time to, have a levy, The other thing that comes up is, well, like it or not, the people are used to a levy in February. And around here, it's more than likely the other two districts and other ones were going to run in a levy in February at all. And there is some value in being able to piggyback on that heightened interest, and the Tri-City Herald giving out recommendations and that sort of thing. And, on the flip side, would it be confusing? What would our turnout be if we did switch it to April? I don't know. These are just things that we came up with. And the final one, I guess it has me most concerned, because I'm really conservative and always nervous about these things, is if you fail in April, what does that do? The next voting opportunity is August. And I hope we wouldn't fail, but if we do, we've created a lot of other issues, and because that's way late to be doing a budget where you've got to know whether you have 26 million or so in levy and levy generated money to do it. And it may also interfere with obligations or commitments you've made to hire employees. So I'm not
So
saying
normally if a district fails, they'd run in February and then run right again in April.
That's right.
Back to back.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Those were the, I think that's it. Those were the pros and cons. So
I think that but we have generally always run it in February, and that's when, and the other districts run it in February. I think that's a good reason to run it in February.
I think if you don't mind, we have a couple members in here that have served on the committee. I'm just curious, not at what they think if we should run it in February. I guess I am interested. Being volunteers, is it harder to get people to, would it be harder to run a campaign for you in a February or in an April, or do you have no preference either way?
I would say, given the media attention and energy that we have right now, I think the sooner the better. I think people are paying attention, and I think we would do well to do it in February. That's
questions, comments for Mr. Roberts from the board?
So I don't have any questions. I do have a comment, though. So we're running a bond currently. We ran a bond in February. It didn't pass. This one is right on the bubble. I would expect if this bond doesn't pass that we would want to regroup, and we'll have this discussion here later. Since we ran one in February, we run one now. If we run out again in February, I'm a little bit nervous that people, I mean, most people I don't think understand the difference between a bond and a levy. It's just money for the school district. And I'm a little bit concerned that people would say, didn't we just vote for this? How much money do you guys want? And so and I'm not saying that's not a reason to, because I can appreciate that there's a lot of energy around levies. People are used to that. If this bond does not pass, I would be nervous about running a levy and then at some other time running another bond, because then we really would have our voter fatigue. So I'm not in favor of moving on this tonight I'm not in favor of moving on this until we know the results from the bond. But I think that is going to play a part in when we actually run this. So while I can appreciate that maybe February is a good time, and even if we pass this bond, then maybe February is still a good time because there's still lots of energy, but I worry about voters not fully understanding what the difference is.
I think we've been really really good at making the voters understand the difference between a levy and a bond. I mean, the bond is for building and levy is for education and for, learning. And that's been, it's been repeated and repeated and repeated, and I think that they don't understand that.
I think those who follow it do, but
There are teachers that don't understand that. I had a teacher I had explained it to yesterday, so. We feel like they do because we don't know. Nobody else. We're working on it.
But through the voter pamphlets and everything, they will be educated on the fact that right now they're paying $4.27 and they are going down to $1.50. So I don't know. I feel like it should be run in February regardless or not of this bond. And I wouldn't even be opposed to running the bond if this one doesn't pass back to back, because we are getting such a savings on this, and it will more than make up for the tax break. And you'll still get a big tax break regardless if you pass the bond and levy or one or the other.
I agree with Ms. Phillips. I'm in favor either way of doing it, and I think this is, I've lost a lot of faith in the voters' pamphlets, and so that's another issue I'd like to see us address with the state. But I think either way, for some of the reasons that have been mentioned, other districts are going to be doing it. There's going to be a lot of attention to that. And having them at the same time, it's like bond, it's going to be for schools, the levy is, all the news that everyone else gets. And the other thing is, when I talk to people that were not in favor of the recent bond, that one of their main reasons was, well, we just don't believe that the taxes are going to go down. So in February, I said, well, just wait, and so in February, it'll literally be right there side by side. Here it is, this is what you're voting on, it's going down. So I just think that that can be a message that can be portrayed that people understand. But I agree, I'm disappointed a lot at sometimes what information people have. But I think it's either way, I'm in favor of it. And so I would be prepared, and I would also be in favor of just running the exact same bond and just keeping it simple. And, I said the $1.49, but even that, you hate to just throw any sort of confusion in, so probably just keeping it as simple as possible and just showing that this is what's happening in our state. This is the levy. Here's the bond because we need buildings. I'll just say one last thing, and I just apologize for speaking so much. I realize that we have passed one bond in 10 years that built 3 elementary schools. And we grew by roughly 5,000 students in that time. So we could have used 8 to 10 schools during that time, and we've had one bond that built 3 schools. And so we're already a year behind from what we were planning last year, which was already probably 5 years behind of what we really needed in our community. So this is like an imperative in my mind, and that really time is of the essence. I mean, the need is there, so to me that's easy to defend. When someone's educated about the need, then they will vote in an informed way. If they're not informed or aware of the need, or if we put forth a small bond, or if we wait, it just gives the impression that it's really not that important, which it's extremely important. We're in dire need, so.
So I have no issue with the $1.50 rate. Honestly, I'm not sure that people are paying that much attention to it, whether it's $1.49 or $1.50. I think, and it's a drop from what it currently is. As far as, and so I'm in favor of that, and I like the way we've got 12% growth in here of our assessed value. I mean, that protects us. I'm not sure it'll continue to grow at that rate. I hope if it does, it's not housing for students, because that would be an even greater challenge. But anyway, I'm good with the $1.50, and I like the way this is set up. 4 years. I'm okay with a 4-year levy. What I am concerned about, and I think this is got to be part of our long-term plan. I would expect we're going to be running bonds every 4 years. If we run a bond and a levy together every 4 years, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. Maybe we want to offset them 2 years, so maybe a 2-year plan on a levy this time makes sense, and we run one every 2 years, bond, levy every 2 years. Anyway, just things that I think we should consider. But, or run them both together every time. I'm not sure, there's some risk in that, but anyway, all things to be considered in part of our long-range planning.
I think that's a really important point. I thought the very same thing, that we need a high school today, and by putting in a high school today, we would still, we would be like close to capacity at our high schools if we put one in today. So, but I also thought maybe running a bond in 3 years, you know. What's nice about this levy is I think it's going to pass because everyone gets a tax break. So we have 4 years, we don't have to worry about running it again. So I just think we've got to capitalize on that at this moment. And we might have to run a bond in 3 years or in 5 years if we don't want to run it with the levy.
So with our remaining time here, let's, we'll continue to have this discussion here, but I think what we need to decide on is we need to decide if we would like to take action on running a bond in, running a levy in February this year. I've heard a couple, at least one discussion for a levy in April, a couple for a levy in February. So we need to decide if we want to take action tonight to discuss at the meeting a levy in February. I think I heard Mr. Richardson, you would support bringing that action forward.
I definitely,
this afternoon.
and we hadn't really had that discussion, but yes, I think we should decide on that tonight, and I'm in favor either way of having it, and also that gives us more time to inform the community about that and how important it is either way. So that by delaying it, I feel like we're kind of vacillating, like, well, okay, well, let's see what happens. But in my mind, it's we need to do it, and that gives us time to actually start explaining to people what's going to happen, and then the bond, we would decide either to be on there or not.
And we'll talk about the bond again in a minute here. Ms. Lankin?
I think we should go forward and do a
Discuss it
$1.50
tonight.
for 4 years. Yes.
Okay, tonight. Mr. Christensen?
I would not support it tonight.
Okay.
Now, it's not that I'm against running a levy in February, but I don't want to run a bond and a levy in February. If the bond does not pass, I do not want to run a bond until we know until we have a plan.
Okay.
So, and if we plan to run a bond later this year, I think if we do we've already had a bond in February, a bond in November, a levy in February, and a bond later this year, I think would just be too much. So I would say let's hold off till we know what this bond does and then plan from there.
And the reason we have this kind of deadline for tonight is because we need to approve a resolution by next meeting, and our next meeting is December 15th. our regularly scheduled board meeting for the fourth week in November, we as a board agreed several months ago that we usually go to WASDAR State Conference and learn a lot there, come back with a lot of ideas, but we don't often have time to digest it other than sending our ideas to Miss Whitney in that way. And so the fourth week in November, we're going to have a study session to talk about what we've learned at WASDA, how we can incorporate that into the district, and talk about that. So we would need to take action on this resolution at the meeting after that, December 15th.
Or we could have a special meeting. to-
Or we could have a special meeting.
Which,
So, okay, but I would just say that the bond's going to pass. And if by some fluke that it does not, I would not be in favor of running another bond in February, because we need to work for it. I mean, there needs to be a lot of work going forward to do another bond.
Okay.
But I think we should do the
Okay.
levy.
And we'll come back to the bond again here in a sec. Ms. Phillips, are you in favor of bringing it forward tonight for a February levy?
Yes.
discussion? Okay, so we'll have this discussion on the levy, whether it's 4 years, 2 years, and whether it's $1.50 again tonight at our meeting. And I think next we can move on to the bond, what we do with the bond going forward. I think the current plan was to have the community builders get together in December, help discuss further long-term and short-term plans depending on the direction that the levy goes, or that the bond goes. Hopefully it passes, like Ms. Lankin says. I think I just heard Ms. Lankin say she's not in favor of running a bond in parallel with a levy in February. Ms. Richardson, would you like to say anything else?
So if you're interested, Sarah has some information just to provide some context to this, if you're okay with that, President Lehrman.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, President Lehrman. As everyone knows, we are standing at about 59.996% right now approval for the bond, and we have, per the auditor's office, 105 ballots outstanding. So we won't know the definitive outcome of the election until the 28th when they certify, and that's scheduled to happen sometime the afternoon of the 28th. So as staff, we think that it's premature for us to make a recommendation and to even have a conversation about what the next steps would be until we know what we're going to have to do if the outcome of the election is successful, or if we need to consider whether and when to run an additional bond. We'll be prepared to have more information for you on the 28th, depending on the outcome of the election. It's our understanding that the timing of the board's meeting on the 28th, the board meeting will occur after that certification, and so that timing makes more sense. Our recommendation, however, is that you consider the levy election certainly as a separate decision because of the timing that's needed to file the appropriate paperwork, name the pro and con committee, et cetera. That has to be done by December.
Thank you. Anybody else have comments on bond path forward?
so I've got a question for you. You've been in communication with the, is it the auditor? Who keeps track of the bond? Is it the auditor?
It's the
Okay.
auditor's office, Mr. Roberts.
Are they, so we've got some 105 outstanding ballots, plus any mail-ins that got stuck in the mail system somewhere that could be coming in?
Correct, and those could trickle in. Those can be accepted until the day before certification. So as long as they're postmarked the day of or before the election date, they can still be counted.
So we will not get any updates between now and then, is that
That's our
correct?
understanding.
So we won't know until it's certified.
Correct.
Any information on recounts?
Yes, so any group of 5 or more registered voters can request a recount. The only other way a recount can be requested is by a quote-unquote person for whom the vote was cast. So if there, any of you as elected officials who were in the election, for example, if you wanted to, could request a recount, but the district as an entity does not qualify within the statutory language to be able to actually request a recount. So if a recount is requested due to any outcome, it would have to be requested by a group of registered voter citizens.
Does it cost anything?
It does. It's, for a manual recount, it's a deposit of 25 cents per vote cast in the total election. For a machine recount, it's 15 cents per ballot cast, and there may be additional costs if the recount, if the outcome of the election is not changed by the recount.
If it's changed, then you're not charged.
Correct. They're not allowed to levy additional costs.
Well, yeah, there's no additional cost.
But that initial cost, yes,
You do pay the initial cost.
absolutely.
And that has to be done how much prior to certification?
It would happen, the request has to be made within 2 business days of the certification. So if we certify on the 28th, that request would need to be submitted to the auditor's office following their process by the 30th.
But if it changes, you don't get your deposit back?
That's my understanding. I can look
Why
at
do they
that
call it a
language
deposit?
again.
It's just a charge?
Yeah, I can look at that language again, though, Scott.
It's a deposit that converts to a charge.
Non-refundable deposit.
So the district can't request it. Can the district fund it?
No.
Okay.
We can't request it, we can't fund it, we can't, again, those PDC rules apply, so we can't engage in any action that would influence the election. I know that there's been a lot of chatter out there around the ballots that are unsigned or where there are signature challenges, et cetera, and the district has had to be very careful to make sure that we are not doing anything that would create the appearance that we're engaged in any of that. We're completely stepped back from it. Now, we could, and we would have the right to contest the election under a different provision of the RCW, Amy, but that would be on account of either misconduct or allegations of illegal voting, voters voting more than once, for example. So there is a fairly involved process that we would have to go through if we believed we had cause to challenge the election.
I'd asked them today some of the same questions, and I think they gave me the same answer, 104, 105 ballots with signature issues, and I asked her how many ballots they usually got back after the last 2 weeks before certification, and I think she said in the 2013 and 2015 elections, like 70 in one election and 110 or something in the other election, so there might be another 100-ish coming in.
One point of clarification I will make, because I think it's been reported in the media that that it's necessary for us to reach a threshold percentage of 60% plus 1, and that's incorrect. We have to meet the threshold percentage of 60%, period. So with the current count right now, that would be 1 vote.
So the cost, and it's not going to be much, but is it just on district voters, or is it the whole county? Do they have to count every ballot of the county again?
I believe that they have to recount they're recounting only your election. My understanding so they would not be recounting any other races. They're only recounting the race that's in question. Where I'm unclear, Steve, is whether the recount, what's being paid for, if someone were to request a recount, whether that's based on ballots cast for that particular ballot measure, or whether it's ballots cast for the entire election, because that number differs.
Can I just ask for clarification? Because you were on kind of asking about the bond. I think I heard Ms. Lincoln and Mr. Christensen say if the bond didn't pass, they would not be in favor of running a bond in February. So what would you recommend in that situation? I may be waiting for a plan, a polished, so maybe April, maybe August, maybe November. depending on your comfort with a polished plan.
If you're asking me?
Both of you. Both of you.
Yeah, so again, my position has not changed from when we went through this before. I think part of the challenge we have is we don't, I mean, I agree, Dr. Richardson, we are way behind. But we've done this, I think, every election. It's here. Here's what we need today. Here's what we need. And it didn't pass, so we adjusted a little bit, and here's what we need now. And I believe that we can put together a plan that shows what schools we're going to build now, how much that bond is going to be. It's going to show what our rate is. I think we need to fix a rate that says this much, and in 4 years, we're going to run another bond. It'll get this building, these facilities. The rate is not going to change because we structure it so that it stays the same. 4 years from now, we'll run another, or 4 years from then, we'll run another bond. We'll show when exactly these bonds are going to run, what buildings they will bring into our building inventory, and how much they'll cost. To me, I think when we can go show the voters that this is what we're doing with their money, this is why we're asking for their money, this is how much we're asking for, that we will have a greater chance of being successful. I don't think we have that now, and I think if we just turned around and went out and ran another, especially the same bond in February, to me, we haven't changed anything, we haven't adjusted anything, we're just hoping that those people who didn't show up, and I can't imagine with this election, if people were really wanting to vote yes, that they would not have showed up. My concern is we would energize those who were against it, that they would come out. And so I'm just in favor, if it doesn't pass, and again, I hope it passes because we need buildings. I don't think anybody's denying that, but I think till we can show people what we're doing, this is what we're going to do, this is when we're going to do it, and this is what it's going to give us, and this is what it's going to cost you, I think we're still just throwing darts and seeing what sticks.
Is it even feasible to turn around and run this same bond again in February, or is that too difficult for the district to pull off in that short amount of time?
Can you see the look on your Citizens Committee's face? The deadlines around getting the resolution ready are fixed, right? So we would have to meet that deadline. You know, in terms of the lift, it's a heavy lift to turn a campaign around. And, you know, I hear everything that everyone's saying. All the literature around bond campaigns say it takes 18 months to pull them together. You know, us turning around the one from February to November was a Herculean lift and has been a Herculean lift for our citizens committees as well. So when you ask, can it be done? I mean, we've already proven we can do hard things. You know, should it be done is a whole nother question that, again, we're not prepared as staff to answer tonight, because our preference would be to wait until this process plays out and then have all of the information in front of us to make a strategic decision.
Yeah, I think
One thing I love about doing it in February is we could pass this bond and this levy and reduce everyone's taxes. And I agree, there are so many people I tried to convince that they were going to be paying less taxes, and they just didn't, they will not believe it until it happens. But it will be on paper and they'll know. So that's the one thing that I think would be so beneficial in doing it, rather than let's do it down in November again. And it's like, look, you got this tax break, now can we raise them again?
So just a clarification, people's taxes are going up this year. They will not see a tax break this year.
Right,
So,
but they will next year,
well, right, a year from
or a
February.
year from February, which will be
Right.
next year. when
Right, but they'll
we
vote
run
on
the
it, right, exactly. And we can, I think, Ms. Phillips, in answer to your question about the bond, I think we would essentially only be able to run the same bond if we, because again, if to all that the discussion we'd have to do, it would have, if we ran another bond, it would have to be the same bond, because you wouldn't be able to change it up, you know, and then prepare all new things. So one thing that wasn't discussed is that this bond, I believe, would be passing in a landslide if it weren't for false statements in the voter's guide. And that's an area I'd like the school district to look at. I'm not familiar with the legal opportunities of the district, but to what Mr. Christensen said, that this bond, if not for a completely false narrative with fraudulent statements in my mind, and it's easily provable, I'll talk to anyone about it, this bond would be passing in a landslide right now if it was not for that.
So I wouldn't support running the bond and levy at the same time. I think that's difficult. I mean, you turn some people off, I think they're going to get two different resolutions at the same time and then they're going to say, wait. And the only reason we'd be doing this is if the bond does not pass. They're going to say, we didn't pass the bond. Now they're asking for the bond again. But in addition to the bond, they're asking us for more money at $1.50 per thousand from the levy. No. Now, the vast majority of people are not going to do that, but even if you lose a small fraction of a percent, you don't pass the bond, and I know it's only 50% for the levy. We probably, hopefully, can still pass that, but I'd hate to see us jeopardize both of them. I think running them at the same time's tough, and I think we've seen research in the past that says that doesn't always lead to success.
We probably should end the study session, but my head's going to explode, so I'll stop talking. But one bond in 10 years, pushing 11 years for 3 schools. Okay, that's...
Okay, so we'll continue this discussion tonight, and we'll open it up for a motion after we have discussion on running a levy in February. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll have our regularly scheduled board meeting at 6:30.